Very good evening, everyone. A warm welcome to the webinar that we are having hosting it today, that is healthy lifestyle and prevention of lifestyle diseases. So this is the second webinar that we have planned in the series of wellness sessions, because COVID has hit us very badly and it has actually taught us to really think second time about your own health. So on this context, we have come up with this idea to actually have a webinar, and we have partnered with Alt Life, who has been supporting us with their really good approach, and we are trying to plan more sessions as well. So on this note, very warm welcome to everyone who is spending their time with us today after a long day at work. So basically, this webinar, we are looking forward for a good session where we'll have question and answer session after a initial talk from Mr. Vijay. So you can type in your questions in the Q&A box so that we make a record of it and your queries will be answered. So on this note, I would like to hand over to Ms. Deepa, who's been the representative from the Alt Life, who has been coordinating us with these sessions. Over to you, Mr. Deepa. Ms. Deepa.
Thank you, Shravan. I would like to introduce our warrior in chief, Mr. Vivek, who's going to be hosting the session today. Good evening, Vivek, and over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Shravan. Thanks, Deepa. I hope you're able to hear me well.
Yeah.
Super.
Yes, Mr. Vivek.
Yeah. So thanks, everyone. I know it's been a long day at work, and thank you all for taking the time to be a part of this webinar. My name is Vivek. I founded Alt Life with the focus of helping people get to better health outcomes, and we will talk a little about it later. But I think, obviously we are living in strange times. I hope all of you are taking adequate care, especially if any one of us has any kind of a lifestyle problem. We know that it's a comorbidity that COVID impacts worse. So it's very important, both from a mind space standpoint as actual health, that we take extra care at this juncture to be as healthy as we possibly can be, right? So there are, 3-4 sections I'd like to cover. I know after a hard day at work, deep dive into biology is probably the last thing that any one of us want. To an extent, we'll try to explain it and try to keep it simple. And then more importantly, focus on the solution of what are things that we could do to solve when we have different kinds of problems. And I think at a minimum, the takeaway is to...
There's an audio lag. There's an audio lag. There's an issue.
We can hear properly.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So let me continue. So to ensure that even if we are all healthy, which is a great place to be, I think a takeaway would be to understand how different parts of the body work and what to kind of keep track of, right? So I think that's broadly going to be the flow and the agenda. Without much ado, getting into the presentation itself. See, almost all of us, right, when we start our lives, we start as a shiny new car like we see on the left, right? And then over a period of time, there are choices that we make, and based on choices that we make, we'll end up with a version of, the car that looks on the right, right? And, the choices different people make are different. It is how do we abuse our mind, our body, and that's what determines at what state we will end up on the right, right? Now that use/abuse has resulted in fairly frightening statistics, right? And in India specifically, heart disease has increased by around 50% in the last 25 years, right? There are around 70 lakh, 7 million people that have been diagnosed with diabetes, and the estimates are 50% don't even know that they have diabetes, right? 1 in 5 women has PCOS. 70% of India's population has been declared as clinically obese, and significant amount of hypertension as well. That is for India. Globally, about 1 billion of the 7 billion people have this problem. And over the next 10, 20 years, that's supposed to get to 2 billion, right? So these indeed are, statistics that we need to be scared of, but it's not just a number, right? It's all around us, our friends, our colleagues, our relatives, right? Our loved ones. Some of us know of it and are dealing with it. Some of us are unaware of it and will need to face the consequences over time. So these are frightening statistics. And the other point is that the age at which it's impacting people is becoming younger and younger, right? But it's not all, gloom and doom. The big question is, can this be undone, right? And can we prevent more damage from happening, right? The answer is clearly an emphatic yes. And, these are some stories, right, where we've been able to transform people's, health and to that extent life, where people who've been diabetic are no longer diabetic, right? People who had, cholesterol imbalances, it's gone. People who've been obese or carrying extra weight have been able to get rid of it. So clearly, there are solutions out there, and there are multiple people, and we are one of them, trying to bring in safe, natural solutions that will help people get to better health outcomes. But before we get to the solution, let's first talk about, when we say lifestyle disorders or lifestyle diseases, what is it that we mean, right? Broadly, these are things that we see. This is people having more weight than is healthy, right? People that have, multiple cysts in their ovaries, women, people that have more glucose in their bloodstream, which then gets characterized as type 2 diabetes, people whose pressure of the blood as it moves through our body is higher than it should be, which is what we call hypertension, people who've got, plaque formation that happens within the body and puts our, what's called our vasculature or our arteries at risk, and eventually heart, which is cardiovascular risk. While we may all believe these are independent and different ailments, science has moved on. We understand a lot more. Right now, there is a strong correlation between all of these, and which is why the medical community calls this metabolic syndrome. And in a way, the way to frame it is, all of these are symptoms of an unified underlying root cause, right? And that root cause is what we will try to understand, because if we solve for the root cause, these are all things that we can keep at bay and improve our condition if we do have any of these. But it's not limited to just these, right? In addition, we talk about a fatty liver, right, which leads to liver disease. We talk about kidney disease. We talk about neuropathy or retinopathy, where our nerves start getting impacted, our eyesight gets impacted. We talk about Alzheimer's and dementia, right, where our cognitive capabilities is something that we end up losing. And obviously the big C, cancer, that we know we're all scared of. Now, almost all of them, again, also have underlying lifestyle or the similar kind of a root cause that increases the risk for these as well, right? Now, one thing I'd like to say, most of us on the call, maybe we are in our 20s, we are in our 30s, some of us in our 40s or 50s, etc. We believe that these are problems that other people have, and the way I am or we are, it's not going to impact us, right? But please do bear in mind the statistics. Please do bear in mind that as we age, right, our risk for each of this increases. So even though we might be young and fit and healthy now, it's important to understand what takes us down this path, and hence make choices that will ensure that we don't end up there, right? So very quickly, weight gain, multiple factors that lead to weight gain, right? It's the environment that we are in, it is the level of activity that we have, it is the kind of dietary choices that we make. To an extent, there's a role of genes that also has a role to play, right? And obviously it has psychosocial kind of an impact, but it is a big risk factor into multiple things that we see on the right? And in a way, it's all part of the same journey. And this is something that we end up facing sooner, which increases the risk. And we will realize that the underlying risk factor for everything that we see on the right increases, and we will understand how, right? Now, similarly, if you were to look at PCOS, right? Obviously, it has to be confirmed by ultrasound, but there are certain symptoms of hyperandrogenemia, of menstrual irregularity and other symptoms that we end up seeing. And there are multiple types. There is insulin resistance linked PCOS, the pill-induced, inflammatory, hidden, inherited or genetic, etc. But the bulk of the cases are the first category, which is what is exploding, which is insulin resistance linked. And obviously there are implications pre-menopause and there are complications post-menopause if you have PCOS, right? Obviously the implications are smaller in terms of magnitude because it may be, not getting periods on time or, some complications in pregnancy, etc. But the real problem is this, because the underlying root cause is the same, the risk that it puts us at for type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease and Alzheimer's is significantly high if one has PCOS, and which is reason to know and to ensure that we plan to solve for it, right? Similarly, in type 2 diabetes, I think the problem is the inability of our body to use the glucose. And if you look underneath and peel the onion, you realize it is inability of our hormone called insulin to function. So contrary to what we may believe, and having seen other diabetics, etc., type 2 diabetes is not a problem of no insulin or our body not producing enough insulin. It's a problem of our body producing more insulin than we need. And that leads to something called as insulin resistance. So while the body is producing more and more insulin, our ability to, function goes lower and lower. The efficiency or productivity of that insulin keeps going down. And that's what is called insulin resistance. And insulin resistance is something we need to keep us watch for. It's an early warning sign. Much before our blood glucose levels rise or our HbA1c, which is one such reading, goes up. Much before that, our insulin starts becoming resistant. And in a way, we will see that while insulin is a and similarly, you look at cholesterol imbalances, where, if you think of our arteries as a pipe, the area available for regular flow keeps reducing because of, collection of a material called plaque. And this again is, something we can control and ensure that plaque formation doesn't happen, and we can reduce it over a period of time, because it is choices that we make that drive this, right? And obviously this puts a risk to our heart's health, and something that we need to manage, right? Now, we've talked about some of these, and now there is a flow chart. Hopefully many of us understand these. Yes, it is medical mumbo jumbo, but I will simplify it as we go forward. But broadly, right, what you see on the left are the triggers, right? It could be high stress. It could be choices of what we decide to eat. It could be a sedentary lifestyle. It could be consumption of a lot of processed food, right? It could be, exposure to pollution or toxins, etc. It can be imbalanced or inadequate nutrition. It could be we don't sleep well, right, etc. Now, what these over a period of time do is they start impacting the way our cells work and function, right? And as you know, we're all made up of cells, right? Individual cells that make a tissue, that makes an organ, and all of these communicate with each other, right? To ensure that we function well, right? And based on one or more of the factors that we see on the left, our cellular health starts getting impacted. Similarly, our defense mechanism, what we know as immunity, but immunity is one component of it, but other components such as stem cells, sanctity of our DNA, our gut microbiome, which I'll talk about, angiogenesis. These are all various defense mechanisms that our body has. And to ensure we stay in a state of good health, we need to keep our army, our navy, our air force working well, right, and primed to fight battles. But if they become weaker is when our ability to deal with it could be pathogens, it could be problems within, becomes lower, and we go down on a path of disease. All right. And the third and another important leg for this is what we call metabolic imbalance. So, hormones play a critical role in the way our metabolism works. And over a period of time, based on one or more of what we see on the left, our hormones, the effectiveness with which they function starts going down. Right? We talked about insulin, but that's not the only hormone. There are other hormones like leptin, like cortisol, etc., which also play a role and keep ensuring that they work well, will again ensure that the communication mechanism between different organs works well, and the way our body is supposed to function will happen. Whereas if they stop working well, is when there are implications. For example, one pathway that we've explored, which is an important pathway, is the insulin pathway. For some reason, if we start producing more and more insulin, right, one of the things that happens is that insulin, in a way, tells our body to store energy for later. And what this means is the nutrition that we consume, part of that gets converted to fat, and think of fat as our body's, a fixed deposit, right? What you put aside for later use. So it could be carbohydrates, right, that we consume. But if you have higher level of insulin, that gets converted in our liver and gets stored for later, right? Whereas lower levels of insulin, it's more like our savings account, that energy gets consumed now, right? Now, take away, higher the level of insulin, higher is the amount of fat deposition that happens. And mind you, it's not fat that we eat, but it is any food that we eat that gets converted to fat for storage, all right? And I'll take a simplistic view, that, and we can get into a detailed, Q&A. There are people that want to go deeper into the science, but the takeaway is higher the level of insulin, higher the fat storage, and we go down a path of obesity, right? The other thing that happens is higher the insulin, the less effective it becomes. So it leads to what's called insulin resistance. And this is a vicious cycle. The higher insulin makes itself less effective. And when the effectiveness of insulin goes down, it makes our body produce more insulin, right, to do the same job. And this goes on and on. But the other role of insulin is because it signals to our body to, produce more fat. So the extra glucose that we might have in the liver starts getting converted into, fat. And when that happens, depending on the rate at which it happens, there is fat that starts getting deposited within our liver, around our liver, right? This is called ectopic fat and visceral fat. And this in turn is not good for our liver, right? Which is starts the process of fat, the fatty liver, and eventually leads to liver disease because it is not able to function well, right? So while fat can be deposited in multiple places in our body, it could be under our skin, what's called subcutaneous fat, not very dangerous, right? But the most dangerous is the one that is around our abdominal region. And, for the lucky few, it is visible. You know that you have fat and you need to take care. There are a few where it is unlucky in the sense that they look thin, but they have fat inside, right, around their organs. So they may not even be aware that there's a risk. So that's something that we call thin on the outside and fat on the inside, and that needs a little extra care, right? So the other thing that does happen when, there is all of this fat conversion that's happening within our liver is there is a reduction in something called as HDL, and there's an increase in something called as triglycerides, because the conversion to fat for storage goes in the form of triglycerides. And this is something that we need to be very careful of. The higher the triglycerides, the more dangerous, and the lower the HDL, the more dangerous. Our goal should be the reverse. How do we increase the HDL and how do we reduce the triglycerides and, very small LDL, etc., right? So the risk of arterial plaque increases when that happens. Similarly, when we have a high level of insulin, what ends up happening is as we use our brains every day, there are some metabolic waste products that get produced. And this is true for the rest of the body, right? These are called beta amyloid and tau protein, etc. And typically there's something called as a glial fluid that when we sleep, fixes it and cleanses it. However, if our levels of insulin are high, the same glial folate is breaking up the insulin, and what ends up happening is the beta amyloid and tau protein deposits in our arteries of the brain increase. And that leads to blockages and eventually leads to Alzheimer's and dementia, right? Similarly, the higher level of insulin leads to higher level of testosterone in women and lower level of what's called SHBG, right? Testosterone gets produced by the ovaries and the SHBG is produced by the liver. And the combined effect of this is the manifestation of symptoms called hyperandrogenemia, where there's facial hair, mere cotton band, balding, a change in the voice, etc. This follicular arrest, which is where the cysts start getting formed but don't get released, which again leads to anovulatory cycles, which takes you down a path of PCOS/PCOD, right? Now, obviously, the higher level of insulin, and insulin, the other role it plays is deposition of glucose in all our cells, right? So if you're not able to deposit the glucose effectively for our cells to convert to energy, the level of glucose in our bloodstream increases, right? And to compensate for that, the body produces more insulin, but over a period of time, which is 8 to 10 to 12 years, what ends up happening is our body's ability to maxes out on its ability to produce insulin. And that's when the levels of glucose in the body start going higher. And that is what we call diabetes, right? And, obviously high levels of glucose in the blood are not good, right? It leads to something called as glycotoxicity and leads to what's called oxidative stress. And throughout all of this, the other thing that is happening is something called as inflammation, which is essentially ions, oxygen ions to a large extent that get produced in our cells that are not able to react with anything. They're highly reactive, right? And if you don't have material to react with them, in some way they start rusting, equivalent of rusting conceptually, the arteries, right? It's burning in some sense, and that's called inflammation. And when that happens is where there are multiple inflammatory diseases, right? That we saw that will get that could ensue, right? So this is, let's say, how it all, the crash, boom, bang of what could happen with small choices that we make, which ensure that our level of insulin is high, right? And in a very simplistic way, just to summarize the same thing and kind of attribute a root cause, one of the pathways is, if we have carbohydrates, and there are two parts in it, glucose and fructose, there's a linear impact on insulin that our body needs to produce, right? Proteins as well, but it's a non-linear impact. And when we have fats, it doesn't have a insulin impact, right? And that higher level of insulin can also happen because of stress, because high level of stress increases the level of cortisol, and there's a similar pathway. But the high level of insulin is what leads to, like we talked about, fat deposition in the liver that makes it a fatty liver, and in the pancreas. That in turn increases the resistance of insulin, which is, it reduces the effectiveness. So to do the same job, suddenly we need a higher level of insulin, right? So this becomes a vicious cycle. And like we said, high level of insulin, one, takes you down a path of PCOS. High level of insulin takes you down a path of storage of fat for later, which is obesity. The fatty liver in turn, makes higher triglycerides, reduces your HDL, and increases your cardiovascular risk. The higher insulin leads to, inappropriate or ineffective deposition of glucose for use by cells, which is where it increases the glucose in our bloodstream. In some way, it leads to, hardening of our vasculature, which is our arteries, which increases hypertension. And these lead to multiple what's called micro and macrovascular diseases, right? And, if you were to forget all of these, I would say one takeaway is, A, insulin plays havoc within our system. It is essential. But if the level of insulin starts increasing, it takes us down a path where multiple problems could happen, right? That should be the one takeaway out of all of this, right? Then the question is, what is it that we can do? What are choices that we make that lead to high level of insulin? and what are choices that help us regulate the level of insulin that our body produces. And that's the key thing to understand, right? So insulin resistance is at the key of all of these, and it's more a dietary disease, right? To a large extent, it is about too much carbohydrate, right? And when we say sugar, let's not confuse it for white sugar, right? Anything that decomposes to glucose within a body, which is any kind of a carbohydrate, leads to higher level of insulin production in our body, right? So this is not something that drugs can solve, which are very symptomatic in their approach, right? To solve it, we have to make changes to choices that we make, which lead to higher level of insulin, right? And one point I'd like to leave here is, while we talk about higher level of glucose triggering a higher level of insulin, let's please pay a little closer attention to fructose and alcohol, right? Now, fructose is one form of sugar. So if we look at white sugar, every molecule is made up of one molecule of glucose and one of fructose, which is what is called sucrose, right? Now, the problem with fructose is that the only place that this can be metabolized in the body is in our liver. So the higher the level of fructose, all of that needs to be handled by the liver. The glucose can go to every cell in the body to be used. Similarly with alcohol. Higher the level of, the alcohol metabolism happens within the liver. As long as there is, obviously our liver is functions well and does its job. You put in fructose, it deals with it. You put in alcohol, it deals with it. However, if there is more amount of fructose consistently or more amount of alcohol consistently, it does put an undue load on the liver, and in the process of metabolization, that again leads to a disproportionate amount of fat deposition in your liver, right? Which is why we need to be careful. And from our biology in school, we may remember fructose is in fruits, right? But let me allay that fear. The amount of fructose that we get from fruits is insignificant, right? It is 8-10 grams we may get in a day. But what used to be around 8-10-15 grams that we would get every day, typically, historically, these days is around 150-200 grams, right? And we'll wonder what changed. Two things. One, what we know, which is white sugar, in which there is fructose. Higher consumption of sugar obviously is a problem. But the other thing is, in all the processed food that we eat, there is something called, it may even be, your tomato chili sauce, right? It's not even sweet. But there's a material called high fructose corn syrup, which is used a lot in a lot of the processed food, right? And our consumption of processed food has increased manifold. So where historically we would get 8-10-15 grams of fructose in a day, it is not uncommon to get 150-200 grams of that, depending on choice of what we do. And let's understand that that is putting an immense load on the liver, and could just be the single reason why we are getting a fatty liver or having high level of insulin, etc. Similarly with alcohol, right? Higher level of alcohol, higher the load on the liver, higher the fat deposition in the liver, and takes us down a similar path of insulin resistance and fatty liver, which has the cascading impact of all of the other things, such as cardiovascular risk, PCOS, obesity, diabetes, hypertension, etc. Right? So, when we have a problem, and I think this is something all of us apply in, jobs that we do. Let's say, there's a wall in a house and the paint is coming off like this. And, hey, we don't like it. So we, fix it and we paint it again. But again, come 3 months later, 6 months later, we have the same problem, right? If we take a symptomatic approach, which is look at it superficially, see that there's a problem with the paint and let's repaint it. That I would call as a symptomatic approach. Whereas if you take a look at, why is the paint coming off, right? That's when you may realize that, hey, you know what? Looks like we have a problem with our, there's a pipe that's broken and there's water that's coming out, or there's a problem with our roofing. When it rains, is then water is getting collected within the walls. And we may also realize that even the electrical problems we are having because the bulb keeps conking off is also related to the same thing. So when we take a root cause approach, fix that pipe or fix that roofing, not only do we solve the problem, it doesn't come back. Whereas in a symptomatic approach, it looks like we've solved the problem, but over a period of time, it comes back again. So important to differentiate between a symptomatic approach to solving a problem vis-a-vis a root cause-based approach. Now, if you look at some of the, like we said, higher amount of weight or PCOS, type 2 diabetes, etc., we know what the problem is. There's more fat in the body than we need, or there are cysts in the ovary, or there's too much glucose, and so on. Right? A symptomatic approach are things that we may adopt. Right? Let's say for obesity, hey, how to eat less and burn more. Right? Can I take medicines that will induce ovulation? Right? Or birth control pills, etc. But can I take medicine that will reduce the glucose absorption in the body, or it will increase the amount of insulin, which will help in regulating blood sugar, etc. None of these symptomatic approaches solve for the root cause, right? Which is the reason that, you try all of this, but over a period of time, the condition keeps getting worse. This is what I would call is managing the problem, but not solving the problem. Whereas if you were to take a root cause based approach, one, can we stop more fat from being produced? Can we stop more glucose from being produced? Can we look at the hormones which are not working well and fix them? Right? Now that would be a root cause based approach, which should ensure that not only do we solve the problem, it's not going to come back. Right? So, obviously many of us unfortunately get to know of a problem only when it's diagnosed, right? But let's understand that much before the problem gets diagnosed, the way the body is functioning has started getting impacted, right? The metabolic imbalance are in play, your hormones are not working as well, your membranes in your cell are not working as well, and it's a very important component of each cell, the membrane around the cell, around the nucleus, around the mitochondria, etc. They have to allow certain stuff in, not allow certain stuff out of the cell. But if they're not formed well, they will, allow intruders in that shouldn't be there, etc. Similarly, I talked about inflammation where there are rogue ions that are, kind of burning us from within, which is what we call inflammation, right? Our cells get maintained every day, where bad cells, weak cells get recycled, new cells get created. But if that stops to happen, there is collection of garbage cells within the body that's happening, which does two things. It takes us down a path of disease, and it takes us down a path of accelerated aging. And, which is why it's important to ensure we give the environment for the cellular repair and maintenance to happen well, which is called autophagy. And we will understand most of it happens when we sleep. If we don't sleep well, and if we ensure that there's no metabolic activity happening when we sleep, is when autophagy works well. So if you eat and go to bed, your body is still digesting, metabolic activity is happening, maintenance does not happen. All right. Whereas if you eat, let's say 3-4 hours before you go to bed, when you go to bed, the metabolic activity is done, and hence autophagy is more effective, which means, your waste cells are not getting collected in the body. Right. And like I said, the defense mechanisms of immunity, gut microbiome, very important. We have a lot of beneficial bacteria that play a significant role, not just in our metabolism, but in our immunity and also in our emotions. So there's something called as a gut-brain axis, and that, controls the way we feel. So it's very important to have the right, depth and breadth of various species of beneficial bacteria. And typically when we take an antibiotic course, not only do we kill bad bacteria, but we end up killing good bacteria as well, right? And what is leading to these not functioning well? It all comes down to choices that we make. What do we eat, right? If we eat the right thing, we will not have a metabolic imbalance. Whereas if we eat the wrong thing over a period of time, our hormonal sensitivity becomes resistant and it stops working properly, right? When we eat matters a lot. Eating 2 slices of pizza at 11 a.m. and at 11 p.m., 2 separate ways our body responds, right? So there's something called as a circadian rhythm, a body clock that various things function against. So our ability to digest is much higher at 11 a.m. as opposed to 11 p.m., right? And it takes much longer. How physically active are we matters, but not in the way that we may understand it. To be metabolically active, the kind of muscles we need to use is completely different from to be a Salman Khan or a Hrithik Roshan. Nothing wrong with that. But you don't need to have a lot of muscles and be a strong man for your metabolism to work well. So there are different kinds of muscle types, and a particular type of muscle type, it's very important that we engage and activate, and it ensures that our metabolism is, humming and working well, right? Like I said, stress is not just in the mind. Stress plays a significant role, and there's a hormonal, cascading hormonal impact that eventually leads to higher level of insulin, right? And just the way to frame it is cortisol is what's called the fight or flight hormone. So if you are in a jungle and in the middle of the night we get out and suddenly we face and we want to go to the restroom, let's say, and there's a lot of pressure, but suddenly you see a snake or a tiger, all of that goes away, right? High level of cortisol comes up, mutes every other response, and makes all energy available to you. So your glucose level and rises because it wants to give you all the energy to either fight the stressor or to fly, to run, to climb a tree maybe, or do both. Modern day, typically it's not physical stressors, right? And yet the body's response is similar. So when we face, let's say, emotional stress because of a career problem or a relationship problem or traffic problems, etc., it does end up in increasing the amount of insulin and leading to insulin resistance, right? Like I said, sleep, very important, not for rest or rejuvenation, right? We may believe that, sleep was, it's only for rest and I can do with less, right? Which is what I thought for a bulk of my life. But I realized, like I was saying, that sleep is super critical for the maintenance to happen. Think of it like a city that we use in the day, right? And there's trash and garbage and litter that gets produced as people go about their activity, right? And when the city sleeps is when the civic authorities come cleanse it, so that when the citizens wake up the next day, we have a nice, fresh city available again. Now imagine that the city did not go to sleep, right? And the time available for the civic authorities from, let's say, a 6-hour window has become a 2-hour window. They're not able to clean it. And what it does, if this happens every day, is the amount of garbage keeps increasing. And that garbage, like I said, can be metabolic waste in our brains. It could be bad and weak cells or dead cells in the body and multiple things. But all of them in the body starts collecting, and if you're not able to fix, the risk of mutation is higher, right? The susceptibility to disease is higher, etc. Extremely important to sleep well, right? At least 6-7 hours plus, and to ensure that there's no metabolic activity that's happening. So the takeaways, almost all of what we call lifestyle diseases have a common cause, which is metabolic syndrome. These manifest as different diseases, right? A root cause approach results in a U-turn, whereas a symptomatic approach is you're going towards the same destination you don't want to go towards, but you're going there slower. At a minimum, you need to do a symptomatic approach, but ideally you should try and do a U-turn so that you go away from a state of disease, right? And to have lasting and reversing effects, our metabolism needs to be rebalanced, our cellular health and function has to be improved, and our body's defense mechanism have to be strengthened, right? So if you have to, kind of solve for this, let's say our pendulum of health has started swinging away, right, from a state of health towards a state of disease. And our goal is, what is it that we can do to kind of push it back towards a state of health? And this continuum, right, what we call the state of risk, typically is anywhere between 8 to 10 to 12 years. So if one gets diagnosed with diabetes, let's say when there are 44, more likely than not, it is from their early 30s that the metabolic imbalance has started creeping in. And over time, it keeps getting worse. And then a threshold gets crossed, and that's when you get diagnosed as being diabetic or having a problem, etc. So it is time dependent and happens over a period of time. And, the goal will be, how do we, it may have taken 8, 10, 12 years to manifest. Can we put extra force and kind of move that pendulum back? That's the problem statement, right? And the answer is yes, we can. Not through medicines, because like I said, they only solve for the symptom. It has to be through choices that we make, right? What we eat and when we eat is around 50% to 60% important, because think about building a house where we make a choice of bricks and cement and wood, right? If you use rotten wood or hollow bricks, you'll still build a house, but its strength won't be good, its stability, its function will be impacted, but it'll look just like the house you wanted to build. Whereas if you use the right bricks, it would be strong, right? Same way, our bricks are our cells, right? Or the food that we eat are the bricks, the cement, the wood, etc. If we don't put the right quality in, there is no way our structure, it'll do the best it can, but slowly and surely it starts getting impacted. So if you want to solve for the problem, with one thing, I would say fix your nutrition, which is what is it that you eat and when do you eat, right? And the other levers that do play a role, like I said, fitness plays a role, stress management plays a role, sleep plays a role, and ideally, especially if you have a problem or if you want to prevent one, we need to get a multi-vector approach where all of these, we do the right things. And what they result in is, obviously, we're trying to, regulate our insulin behavior, boost our immunity, preserve our DNA and what we call our mitochondrial sanctity, reduce inflammation and oxidative stress, promote a healthier gut microbiome, right? Improve the cellular maintenance, which is autophagy, etc. Right? But the key to all of those is what we see on the right. It's not medicines, right? It is getting the right nutrition, etc., etc. Now, obviously, there are specific choices, right? And these are what you can look at in terms of choices you can make. This is at a high level. However, if you do want more detailed inputs, discussion, advice, please do reach out to us, and we're happy to help you make the right kind of choices. But this is some quick takeaways for you to remember. I think, when people talk about nutrition, especially those are into it, there's a lot of what's called macro focus, which is, how much carbohydrate, how much protein, how much fat, etc. But let's all understand, extremely important is to get the right micronutrition, which is different kind of vitamins and minerals that the body needs to function well. It can't just be about, the macros, right? That's one takeaway. Second, in general, lower carb helps with insulin behavior. We need protein, but we don't want it to be low. We don't want it to be high. It just needs to be right, which is what we call adequate protein. And then we need healthy fat, which is good because every membrane that we talked about is made up of fat. A bulk of our brain is one kind of a fat. So if we don't eat the right healthy fat, it actually does impact the way our body functions, right? Ensuring that we have enough fiber, right? Because that's the food for the bacteria that are in our gut. If you don't get enough fiber, that's a problem, right? And there are certain things to balance, and this may be a little technical, which is your sodium and potassium, your calcium and magnesium, your omega-3 to omega-6. Again, iron, less problem, high problem, right? And definitely some things to avoid would be processed food and what's called polyunsaturated fatty acids. And the way to think about it is any kind of industrial seed oils, right? What we may believe is the healthiest are things to avoid. It is saturated fat, which comes from natural grass-fed sources, be it your butter, ghee, which is good, right? Which is what our ancestors used to use. Whereas it's only in the last 50, 60 years, there's an increase in what causes higher inflammation, right? Which is seed oils. We could not get the seed naturally. It's machines that get it out, etc. Obviously, if we are what we eat, we are also what we eat. If the fruits and vegetables that we use have a lot of chemicals in them, we get it, and that's a problem, right? Industrially farmed, meat, problem. So there's a bunch of things that we need to avoid. And anyway, we can give detailed advice separately. Try to reduce. There's been a lot of debate about, eat little, eat multiple times. That's not good advice. Try to minimize the number of times that you eat. Eat in as less of a window, the concept called intermittent fasting. Ensure that you eat at least 3 hours, right, before going to bed, right? Avoid snacking, or eating just before bedtime, etc. There's something called as slow twitch muscles. That's what our focus should be if we want to improve our metabolism. And that is where we need to ensure that we walk or jog, which is one thing in our control. These are muscles that are very metabolically active, and we need to activate them, right? Whereas when we run, etc., we use what's called fast twitch muscles. That helps us build muscle, which is good, right? But we need to ensure that we engage and activate our slow twitch muscle. So at a minimum, can we get 40-45 minutes plus of walk every day, right? And obviously flexibility matters, for which yoga helps. Resistance training matters, which helps us in building muscle, which also helps. But at the same time, over exercise not good, over indulgence on protein supplements not good, etc. Correct? Talked about stress and the role it plays. So there are multiple practices available or tools and techniques available that will help us reduce our stress, which we should do, be it pranayama, meditation, breathing. At the same time, we should also try and eliminate the reasons of stress. If needed, talk to counselors that can help, etc. Right? And similarly, I underscored the importance of sleep, ensuring that we get good quality sleep. And there's a science to it, and there's a way to get good quality sleep. Right? So in summary, if I were to take away all of the mumbo jumbo, the villain is what I call the four-eyed monster: imbalanced insulin and metabolism, ineffective cells, inflammation in the body, and impaired immunity. And that is what we are fighting if we want to stay healthy, right? The four-eyed monster, which is imbalanced insulin and metabolism, ineffective cells, inflammation and impaired immunity. The sidekick, which helps us, right, but is not the hero, it's a symptomatic approach. It's actually a mess, right? Which is medicines for life, eating less, calorie counting, etc. It's a symptomatic single vector approach, or potentially surgery, right, for different conditions. But the hero is something that's fresh, right, which is food and fasting as medicine, rhythm alignment to our circadian clock, exercise and fitness, sleep, and harmonious life and mind with no stress, right? So, we're all fighting against the four-eyed monster. A symptomatic approach helps us manage, but it's actually a mess, which is medicines and eating less and symptomatic single vector approaches and or surgery. And the hero, what we need to adopt to ensure that it's a sustainable ongoing solution, is fresh, which is food and fasting regimen, aligning to the rhythm of our body's clock, exercise and fitness, sleep, and a harmonious life where we are bereft of stress, right? So these are the only ways. If we engage with this and activate as many levers as we possibly can, is when, not only will we prevent getting any one of these, but if you have any of these problems, we will take a U-turn and head back towards a state of good health, right? So we'll get to Q&A very quickly, talking about AltLife, what we do. Our goal is to eradicate lifestyle diseases, one, by helping people that have them reverse it, and two, by helping people who don't have it ensure they don't get it, right? And to large extent, track B, we believe, needs to be at a children level, where we help them make the right choices when they're younger itself, right? So some of the products that we have, one is to beat disease. This is something called as the Health Restore program, where every vector that we saw, right, we provide the food, we do the smart diagnostics, we provide consultations, we do exercise, yoga, meditation, we have consultants available. So we do a completely immersive program that will take you from a state where you have a problem to a state where all your parameters become better, guaranteed, right? So this is for people that have the problem to consider, right? To prevent disease, we have two offerings. One is what's called the Immunity Revive and the Gut Revive. Like I said, gut, very important to have a healthy gut, healthy microbiome. And immunity, again, we all recognize, very important. So this is a proactive, preventive program where we have, again, food that we provide that is a subscription which comes to wherever you could be, at home or office or wherever you could be each meal. And it helps you, build a strong gut and strengthen your immunity, right? Then we also have something which I believe, anybody that has a question mark in your mind needs to take advantage of, where we say we predict disease. So we have a test where not only are we looking at what's called lagging indicators, right? When you already have disease, but also look at how is your metabolism, is there inflammation, is there insulin resistance, and we are able to look at how the body works and be able to project if you believe you're on a path to disease. That helps you take a proactive approach and take preventive steps now so that you never get there. And we also have that is a one-time test, which I suggest everyone that believes can take advantage of make figure out where you are and what path you're on, and if all is well, or if you need to take steps now. There's also an ongoing monitoring, once a quarter, once a month, or every 6 months, which is to ensure that we keep testing and give you early warning signs if we see something that's going to go wrong. We have other products as well, which is healthy food and supplies, exercise, yoga and meditation classes, diagnostic tests, etc. And we have a loyalty program that covers all of these. Please do take a look, when you get a chance. And based on our relationship with Huawei, I think we should be circulating a discount code that any of you could use against all of our products separately, and we'll route this via the HR team. So that's broadly what I wanted to cover. Lifestyle disorders can be beaten, can be prevented, can be detected in advance, right? If you want to solve for the root cause, you have to focus on rebalancing your metabolism, improving your cellular health, building stronger defense mechanism. AltLife has made it easy and convenient to achieve guaranteed results where we apply cutting-edge science in safe and natural ways. So this is one way to do it. Irrespective, make the right choices. We're happy to give you the advice as well. I mean, you don't need to consume the product, because in our war, in our journey, we do want people who have it to solve it, people who don't have it to prevent it, and we're happy to share our knowledge. Please do reach out to us. So this is various ways to reach out to us. Our website is livealtlife.com. Our phone, email is all on the screen. And I think I'll just leave it there. Thank you all. If I did overdo on the science part, I'm sorry. I hope there are a few takeaways that you have that will help you make the right choices. If you have a problem, make sure, if you want to beat disease, there are programs. If you want to prevent disease, there are immersive programs. If you want to predict disease, there's a test that I suggest you take, which will help all of you. With that, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity. Thanks for taking the time. And we'll open it up for questions, please. Thank you. And please do use the Q&A or the chat section to be able to type out any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vivek, for this insightful session. So we'll start the Q&A now. So all the attendees, please free to drop in your queries so that we can understand and we can address them as quickly as possible.
So I see a question about the burning sensation in my heart very often. So I think obviously not a good sign, but it could be something very innocuous, or it could be something serious. Hopefully it's very innocuous, because there's something called as heartburn, which is more about acidity and your gastrointestinal system not working well. But if there's a specific problem, please do reach out, and we are happy to help you figure out what the problem is, right? You mentioned about sleep apnea, is snoring related to this? In some way, yes. Snoring is related to sleep apnea. There are problems that prevent us from sleeping well. Not always, but in some cases. And obviously, there are solutions to sleeping better. And again, happy to kind of talk about specific problem and if there's something that we can do to help. There's another, in some way, unrelated question, which is more about ear problem with tinnitus. And I think obviously it's a little different from the area of focus that we had, but something that you should pay attention to and do the best you can to fix. And an ENT doctor is the right person to help you through with this. please do, if there are questions around right choices, what kind of a diagnostic test will help get an early warning sign, any of around metabolism and so on, happy to take those. Will the sleep during day compensate for the sleep lost at night? I wish I could say yes, but the answer is no, right? Because like I said, nature has built us in a way where our circadian clock works in a particular way. We are primed to be active. We are, in the day and to sleep at night. And obviously we have the will and the ability to challenge it, but it does confuse the body. It's not necessarily important. So, it's not just sleep, it's also the body's processes that happen when we sleep. So, while I know multiple industries work, on a 24/7 kind of a clock, it is an occupational hazard. And from a human body perspective, it is a problem. It is a problem.
So, Mr. Vivek, I have a question regarding the insulin resistance. So, we've heard about changes which happen internally in the body. So, but when you talk about insulin resistance, is it that we get signs, warning signs on our skin or any other visible factors which can be diagnosed or which can be checked early on and can be prevented?
Yes and no. I wish there was an easy way to figure it out, and there are some easy ways, right? One sign to get tested is if the middle of a body, so central obesity, which is the middle of a body putting on and collecting weight, is one risk factor, right? If our blood pressure is seen to increase over a period of time, that's a risk factor, right? And there are some of these physiological signs that we can see, right? There's something called as fasting insulin. If the levels of fasting insulin, not fasting blood sugar, right? Fasting insulin will start going up. Now that's a sign. But I think there is a way to confirm it by doing blood tests. But I think if we see, higher triglycerides, lower HDL, now that again is a problem. These are all early signs. I would suggest that if our weight is increasing, right? If we are seeing that our weight is increasing, or if our middle of the body is becoming bigger, that's an early warning sign to get that test done to see if your insulin resistance is setting in. And like with anything, right? Like with, if I'm headed on a road from, let's say, Bangalore to Mumbai, but I don't want to go there, the sooner I know, the easier it is for me to come back, right? Which is why it's important to know if you are insulin resistant, and the sooner you know, the better, and the easier it is to come back. Obviously, if I go to Mumbai, coming back to Bangalore is a arduous, longer journey, right? So, great question, Shravan. I think weight changes because it's highly correlated to changes in insulin. If you see weight gain happening, if you see the middle of a body, that's a sign I would be careful. If you see our blood pressure slowly increase, that's a sign I'd be careful and get a test. If you realize it's there, I would take proactive steps to ensure that we work towards getting to better levels of insulin. So I have another question here, which is keto diet good in the long term? So there are, various definitions of keto diet, right? I would say that keto diet, if it is purely in terms of balancing macros, not good, right? Secondly, I think it's not as much about keto or about less than X grams or Y percentage of carb, etc. In general, a low carb, medium protein, high fat will help and can be done, right? Now, the other way to think about it is, if you have a problem, a more stringent, lower carb regimen will help you get closer to good health faster. But once you get there, you can go back to a more relaxed a choice where you can make a more balanced kind of choices. So, if you have going too fast, you need a break just to reduce the speed, right? And, a diet, I'm not saying necessarily keto diet, but the right diet, which gets the right balance of macronutrition and micronutrition, is like the break that will help you. But once you get to the speed that you're good at, you can continue to go at that velocity, right? So I would see it more as an intervention to fix your underlying problems and then find the right balance that you can sustain over a period of time. I hope that answers your question. But like I said, I think one needs to be careful about, I mean, it's less about, whether you go into nutritional ketosis or not matters lower. How you control your insulin events, etc., matters a little more. Ensuring that you have the right micronutrition matters a little more. Super. As we wait for much more questions, I'd like to thank you all again for taking the time. I hope it was useful. Secondly, like I said, please do go to our website, which is livealtlife.com, or to our healthy food store, which is retail.livealtlife.com, and look at various offerings. See if you want to do that one-time test, etc., to see where your state of health currently is, and if there is some issue that you need to take proactive steps against. There's a question on can type 2 diabetes situation be brought to? Absolutely, absolutely. And I think we've seen many such journeys in Alt Life. We have had clients that were on medication and diabetic who now eat normal food and are without medication and their parameters are normal, right? Clearly, can type 2 diabetes be brought to a normal with making the right kind of choices, and obviously the Health Restore program that we have, where we put it all together, are ways to ensure, right, that diabetes is managed well. There's another question on not getting enough sleep, and it takes time to sleep. So I think this is a problem, and I think something I urge you to solve, right? To figure out why are you not able to sleep, and what does it take for you to get to sleep. It could be stress that could be there. It could be something physiological. But I think there are ways to identify the problem and then fix the problem. Extremely important to sleep well. So I would urge you to talk to specialists and figure out the reason why you're not able to sleep well and fix them, because I think sleep is very important, and you need to solve this problem. How much fructose and how much alcohol is excessive? I don't think there's a formula about it, but I would say 10-15 grams a day of fructose across all your sources is a good place to be, right? And obviously it's easier to measure in terms of half the weight of white sugar would be fructose in a sense, right? Alcohol, again, is a separate conversation we can have, but the right answer to give is something you need to avoid, right? But that being said, excessive alcohol obviously has deleterious effect on our health. But I'm sure one can find the right balance to ensure that it's not something that's consistent, kind of a push on one's liver. And if it's once in a way, it should be okay. How and whether absolutely intermittent fasting does help a diabetic? Essentially, one of the things, obviously we didn't go into as much detail, was what we call the number of insulin events, right? How much time and how many times in a day are we taking action that increases the level of insulin? And to solve for diabetes, one of the goals should be the reduce the number of insulin events, reduce the amount of insulin that gets generated, right? So if you eat in a smaller window, what it ensures is any insulin only happens in that window, which means the window when you're not eating are all times where insulin levels are low, right? So that's one thing that it directly helps. So intermittent fasting, I think it is conditioning, easy to do. Extended fasting, again, once you have done multiple 96-hour fasts, etc., but without advice, without supervision, not something that I suggest you do. But both intermittent fasting and extended fasting are tools that help, and it's a conversation we can have to help you make the right choices. Another question is fatty liver irreversible? No, it is reversible. Just like how you put fat in, you can get fat out. And obviously, as the scarring of the tissue happens and it goes through stages, some part of it is irreversible, right? But it's just fat deposited, that is reversible for sure. Super. So I'd like to thank you all for being part of the session. Hopefully it was useful. Please do reach out to us if there are any questions or any advice that you believe you might need that will help you get to better health outcomes. Take care in this unprecedented times outside. Have a good evening. Thank you. Thanks, Shravan.
Thank you so much, the whole AltLife team for actually organizing this webinar. And I think it was a very insightful session, and there were a lot of eye openers for me at least to actually look at the science which is going in the body and the way we can make amendments and make changes to for a better health. So thank you for this wonderful informative evening, I could say. So on behalf of Huawei, I would like to thank AltLife and as well as the attendees for your questions. I think we can conclude now. Yeah. Thank you all. Yeah.
Thank you.